project, the European Union and the University of Greenwich. I'd just like to welcome you all here to this workshop. It's the final workshop for the GEO-SAFE project, which has been a 4-year EU RISE funded project, which will be completed in end of April this year. And over those 4 years, the GEO-SAFE team have done a lot of work in a whole range of different aspects of wildfire. Basically, we've covered every aspect conceivable in wildfire research as part of the GEO-SAFE project. This particular workshop is focusing on the evacuation part of the project, and I'm very pleased to welcome our speakers, which are a combination of GEO-SAFE partners and external speakers. And I hope we're going to have, I'm sure we're going to have an interesting set of presentations today. Just a couple of things on housekeeping. There should be no testing of fire alarms today. That was done yesterday. We do them once a week. So if you hear the fire alarm in the building, we need to get out of here as quickly as possible. This particular building room, we've got an exit through here and an exit at the back and to the side. And the assembly point is outside on the quadrangle here, I believe. In addition, other housekeeping, there's the restrooms for our North American visitors, or the toilets for everyone else, and they're outside the door here. I believe the male toilets are here, and the female toilets are up.
Disabled toilet here, women's, and then...
Okay, disabled, which anyone can use, and then women's and men upstairs. And we're going to be in here until 1. And then we've got to move to another room. We're going to be upstairs. So we're going to have the first session here. We'll have a coffee break. We'll have lunch upstairs. And then the afternoon session will also be upstairs in another room. I've just got a couple of slides I want to go through, hopefully just to set the scene of what it is we're talking about over this today. As we all know, wildfires threaten human habitation, not just forested areas, and in particular WUI regions, where we have the wildland-urban interface. And as the urbanisation is increasing, and we're getting more and more habited areas close to forests, this obviously threatens the populations. And as these urban areas are getting larger and larger, we're having larger and larger communities at risk. And it's not only the permanent residents in these areas, it's also the visitors to those areas. As the fires tend to happen in the summer, which is also the vacation period, we get a lot of holiday makers, vacationers, populating some of these areas. And so we need to keep in mind when we're looking at this research into human behaviour and evacuation in wildfire areas, is that it's not only the permanent residential population that's at threat, it's also the temporary, the transient populations. And those transient populations can be much, much, much larger than the permanent population in that region. And the recent fires in Australia are an example of some of that. Equally, we've been seeing fires the fire season tends to be getting longer and longer, probably due to global warming. We're seeing longer fire periods and more intense fire periods. And so the challenge of managing evacuation is actually quite a big challenge. And if we get it wrong, there can be catastrophic outcomes. And I've just listed a couple of examples here of some fairly large fires from recent times, the most recent being the Australian fires from this current fire season in Australia, where we've seen over 18 million hectares burnt out. There's been something like 34 fatalities reported, and thousands, if not tens of thousands of people have been forced to evacuate. In Canada, in Alberta in 2019, we had 800,000 hectares burnt, tens of thousands of people evacuated. California, 62,000 hectares burnt, 85 fatalities, thousands evacuated. Here in Europe again, in Attica in Greece, 2018, 102 deaths, 700 people evacuated. And in Portugal in 2017, 66 fatalities and 45,000 hectares burned. And I think the key thing is that the fires in Europe can be different to what we see in the United States and in Australia, in that, or I should say North America and in Australia, in that some of the evacuations involve pedestrians in some way or another. And so while it's important to consider obviously the vehicle-based evacuation, pedestrian evacuation in wildfire is an issue, and particularly so in Europe. Planning and managing large-scale evacuation is probably one of the most challenging evacuation scenarios conceivable. We've got the psychological and behavioural drivers that we have to understand that drive things such as go or stay behaviour. And also not only go or stay, but when do you decide to go? So it's one thing to have a model that decides whether you go or stay, but how long does it take you to make that decision? The need to understand how, when and where the wildfire is spreading is also critical in understanding and planning evacuation, because it can impact evacuation routes. And it's not only, and I keep on saying this, and not many people tend to listen, it's not just where the fire front is, it's where the hazard front is that's important for evacuation. Where is the smoke? Because the smoke will impact evacuation. If you can't drive down a route because you can't see because of the smoke, you can't evacuate down that route. So it's not only where the fire front is, it's where is the hazard front. And you hear me talk about hazard front all the time. Where is the hazard front? And that includes smoke, not just flames. There's requirements of special needs communities. You've got disabled people, for example. You've got care homes. You've got the elderly. We need to take those into consideration when we're looking at evacuation in wildfire situations. You've got infrastructure constraints. You could have a single road in and out of an area, which is obviously going to impact the evacuation capability. Or you can have multiple roads in and out, but because you've got such a large volume of people trying to utilise those means of evacuation at the same time, those become congested. So even if you've got multiple routes out, those can become congested, especially if it's in an unmanaged, if they're being used in an unmanaged way. And as I mentioned or hinted before, you've got the multimodal nature of the evacuation. And this can involve private cars, it can involve public transport, it can involve air and sea transport, and pedestrian-based evacuation. All of these different means of evacuation can be used in wildfire evacuations. And then you've got individual decision-making related to, for example, destination. Where am I going to evacuate to? What route am I going to use? And am I going to have detours on my route? Will I decide to stop because I'm going to go and pick up the kids before I evacuate? Or I'm going to go and get some gas before I go on this long journey? So all of these things we have to take into consideration when we're planning and trying to manage evacuation. So we need to do a lot more research to improve the applicability and reliability of our urban scale agent-based evacuation simulation tools. Now, the areas where I believe we need to do more research include improving our understanding and quantification of the response phase behaviour. What is it that's driving people to make decisions as to when and where they're going to start to evacuate? We need to improve the way we represent vehicles, road networks, traffic, evacuation destination decisions, evacuation choice decisions, and the interaction between vehicles and pedestrians. All needs to be improved in our models. We need to include walking behaviour of pedestrians over long distances. And not only walking behaviour, but how the walking behaviour is impacted by the nature of the terrain that they're walking over. Are they walking over paved roads or rough ground? We need to take into account the impact of culture and geographical and the geographical region on the behaviour that people are making. So data we collect in the United States might not be applicable in France, for example, because of important cultural differences between the regions, not just geographical differences between regions, but also cultural differences of the population and the people. And we need to represent smoke in our wildfire simulations. So we need to know where the smoke front is. I mean, that was a picture at the top from the fires in Australia recently, and clearly you can't drive down that road because if you're not going to be killed by the fire, you're probably going to crash and cause injuries or fatalities because of those conditions. And finally, we need to improve the simulation speed and performance of our models. So if we're going to hope to model tens of thousands of people over areas of square kilometres, our simulation tools need to be appropriate to meet that challenge in terms of simulation speed and performance. So this workshop has been organised as part of the GEO-SAFE project to share experience and insights in this fast developing field. And I think today we're going to be talking about all of these topics in the presentations. So finally, I would like to thank the speakers who have generously given their time to share their knowledge and ideas with the delegates that are here. I want to thank the University of Greenwich team that have worked pretty hard to organise the workshop, and not only organise the workshop, but also their work on the GEO-SAFE project. I want to thank all of our GEO-SAFE partners for a very interesting and productive past 4 years. We've done a lot of work as a consortium, and I think we've achieved quite a lot. And finally, I want to thank the European Union. This might be my last